If someone is doing a physiological hormone replacement therapy with testosterone, we are mimicking the correct amount of testosterone that should be in the body. This should not require or necessitate aromatase inhibition. There's no such thing as a genetic over-aromatizer. You're just fat or you're drinking too much alcohol. This is just the way it is. Increasing injection frequency is the turn it off and turn it back on TRT. It doesn't solve every problem, but it's a really easy place to start.
What if we look at the brain consequences of the reverse? What are the risks for brain health for people who have low testosterone in the long term?
It seems that, so when we look at, if we even go beyond that and look at the diseases of aging, which is 4 primary diseases of aging, which is diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and dementia, which are all, all have one thing in common, which is they all involve to some degree insulin resistance. Dementia is sometimes referred to as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. So sex hormones, in men, primarily testosterone, and in women, way more complicated, but particularly progesterone is implicated in this, is that these hormones are very neuroprotective and they're very important for energy metabolism in the brain. When the brain is not receiving proper energy, it literally physiologically becomes depressed. So not only do you feel subjectively worse, your brain doesn't fire properly, but this can also lead to increased degradation of brain tissue, shifting of gray matter and white matter. And it seems that this will age the brain at an accelerated rate. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for testosterone replacement therapy done properly, is that if it's done correctly, and again, the way that you do it correctly is meeting the medicine halfway and living healthfully as if you would be making those levels naturally if you could, it should be protective against all of these situations. So when we look at the effect of low testosterone in the brain, not only are we looking at reduced energy metabolism, insulin resistance neurologically, but again, coming back to that cortisol adrenaline thing, we're also looking at more stress hormone activation. So subjectively, the brain is going to feel more anxious, more like monkey mind. The GABA and glutamate ratio is also very important for how you're subjectively thinking and feeling. That's going to get all shot to shit. But the brain is going to age faster and it's not going to function as well as it should. And that's why going on TRT when someone's hypergonadal, people often note that their brain fog is gone and they feel more mentally at peace. Like their mind is less like, and it's just more still and stoic. That I think is very therapeutic, both subjectively, but also long-term for brain health too.
You mentioned the GABA-glutamate axis there, which is something I find interesting. So I just want to ask you about that. How much of that axis being off kilter, in most scenarios, glutamate being way too high, do you think is a at least partial explanation for a lot of the behavioral issues, for want of a better term, that we maybe see in the population now? As in, like, for want of a, being triggered too easily, being more emotionally driven, however you want to sum it up, what I'm kind of referring to there.
Yeah. The GABA and glutamate ratio is really interesting. So GABA and glutamate are both metabolites of glutamine, which, as people know, is like an amino acid. You get it from protein, helps with recovery, stuff like that. So GABA is your brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it's what drugs like alcohol, benzodiazepines, that's what they work on. It sedates things, brings things down. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmission. So it's not like, dopamine or something like this, which feels good. It's just overactivity in the brain. And both are important in balance. Sometimes when it comes to neurology, we go, oh, this one's good, this one's bad. Dopamine good, cortisol bad. They're all really fucking important. We sometimes get a bit myopic with things. But the ratio of these is very important. And when this ratio is out of balance, typically it's what's called excitotoxic, which means that the brain is basically firing haphazardly, and then you're consciously embodying that, being alive. And this, for a lot of people, will feel like an overly anxious, like a hair trigger stress response, and a monkey mind, the inability to calm and keep the mind still. And one of the main hormones that's very important, there's 2 main hormones that's very important for GABA signaling. One is allopregnanolone, which is the 5-alpha reduced form of progesterone. And the other one is, I can't pronounce it, but it's the one of the metabolites of DHT. So both of these hormones are contingent on 5-alpha reductase. And when guys take drugs like dutasteride and finasteride, which block 5-alpha reductase expression, My concern is that some guys who don't experience short-term side effects of this may be experiencing either unconsciously behavioral and neurological side effects of things because it is changing the brain architecture, but it could also be causing excitotoxicity over years and decades, which I think is something that we're going to discover down the track, is that these drugs may also accelerate early onset dementia. That's just a theory, though.
You've just started TRT. It is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
How much of an effect do you think lifestyle and also diet, especially additives, are having on that axis? Because obviously we all know about like monosodium glutamate, which now is kind of the devil, so they sneak it in the form of glutamic acid and other things. Are those things, in your opinion, having a meaningful effect?
I think they're all contributing as well. Like, I read the ingredient labels of like the food in the supermarket here, and it's terrifying. Like this, in the Baltics, like this shit just doesn't exist, and it's everywhere over here. It's mental. So I think that all of these things, you know, the artificial colors, the artificial sweeteners, the artificial flavors, things like MSG, which is what you mentioned before, all of these things as well, which can contribute to gut inflammation, so potentially like genetically modified gluten that you have a lot of over here, the solvents that they even use for natural flavors. I mean, I think all of this stuff is, you know, going back to like the pollutions, the plastics, the pesticides, I think all of this stuff is just adding and adding and adding and adding and adding to this toxic burden. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, when people adopt, you know, things like carnivore diets, or even like, you know, like a whole food plant-based vegan diet, which I'm not an advocate for, but, you know, when people adopt this by default, they tend to cut out a whole bunch of this artificial crap that's in the processed food. And I think that is also a contributing factor as to why people feel better, you know, either end of the extreme that they go with these diets, is because they're getting rid of all that processed junk. And, you know, over here, like, I never do like meal prep and stuff like that when I'm at home, but here, like, I travel with meals, like I'm conscious of what I'm eating, like I'm reading the ingredient labels, because when you don't have this stuff ever, because it just doesn't exist in the country that I live in, and you come here and you have it, you feel it. Like, it's, whereas for people over here, I assume it's very normal, but those food additives, we don't know if a tiny little bit of them is making a difference, because we can go, well, mechanistically it's toxic, but then the amount that you're consuming is so small that it probably doesn't do anything, and that's a lot of people's argument. Over a lifetime, we don't know. And I'm a big believer when it comes to synthetic artificial shit that we're looking at guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty.
Sure. So we've spoken a lot about testosterone, obviously, because we all love testosterone, we all want more. What about the role of estrogen in TRT? How big of a role does that play? What do you see in terms of good and bad practice, in terms of AIs or like demonization of estrogen and so on?
Yeah. It's an interesting field. When I got into TRT many years ago, it was everyone took, you know, either a quarter of a milligram or half a milligram of anastrozole twice a week to keep your estrogen within a sweet spot. Over time, that has changed now, and now there seems to be kind of like a tribal divide between people who are pro-AI use, anti-AI use. There are people who think that some people are genetic over-aromatizers. Spoiler, there's no such thing as a genetic over-aromatizer. You're just fat, or you're drinking too much alcohol. This is just the way it is. And when it comes to aromatase, when we look at what aromatase is, so firstly, if someone is doing a physiological hormone replacement therapy with testosterone, we are mimicking the correct amount of testosterone that should be in the body. This should not require or necessitate aromatase inhibition. Otherwise, the healthy 20, 21-year-old athletes would also have to take aromatase inhibitors. So a big part of why people are needing these to fix the side effects they're having is because they're taking big boluses and they're giving themselves big roller coasters, which men are not meant to have, or they're taking too much of it. You know, I think that if you're taking, like, you know, 500 milligrams a week, a gram a week of testosterone, like, you know, people say, oh, you know, you want to take a whole bunch of primobolan or something like that to offset the effects of estrogen. I don't know how people think that's healthier. It's still antagonizing the shit inside the body anyway. So I think when we're talking about PED cycles, I don't, if people are going to do that stuff, I think it's all unhealthy, and aromatase inhibitors probably have a role in that. It's not something I do. But when it comes to hormone optimization therapy, I think that we should be looking at the side effects that men are having, because the important thing that often gets overlooked is that guys are going, I'm having these side effects, and the practitioner's going, it's not estrogen, you never need to block aromatase, the aromatase inhibitors have no place. Cool, they've still got side effects, they've still got problems, and we need to work out how to fix these issues. In my experience, all of those issues come down to, and Jay Campbell has been a big advocate for this, is insulin resistance is driving increased aromatase expression. That's a big one. Too much alcohol consumption and hypothyroidism. Those ones account for, and excess body fat kind of comes with all of those as well. All of those, in my experience, account for all the side effects that we see from excess estrogen on TRT. The way around it is, firstly, you increase frequency. So I used to sell mobile phones when I was at university, and when someone came in with a phone problem, we'd say, have you turned it off and turned it back on? Increasing injection frequency is the turn it off and turn it back on TRT. It doesn't solve every problem, but it's a really easy place to start, and it solves a lot of problems. So if someone is 40, 50, 60 pounds overweight, you may need to do daily injections until you lose the weight. That's not going to be forever. Daily injections get old after a while, especially when you're putting it into the delt. But it's hard, but it's not that hard. You can do it. But that's a big factor. But for a lot of guys, just going from 2 to 3 injections a week can make a difference. Now, if I've got someone who is obese, alcoholic, insulin resistant, firstly, something like metformin is a better thing to reach for than an aromatase inhibitor, in my opinion, because you can Google metformin aromatase, and lo and behold, in people who are insulin resistant, it will reduce aromatase expression because you're correcting the insulin resistance, which is what is driving the increased aromatase expression. But if someone is in a situation where they're like, hey, I'm doing daily injections or whatever, and it's not working, the way that we can get around this and we can restore an optimal androgen to estrogen to DHT balance is transcrotal testosterone cream, which is a compounded 20% cream. The typical creams you get from the pharmacy, like Andro Forte and stuff, or Testogel, are like 2 to 5%. This is a 20% cream with enhanced absorption. You apply it to a shaved scrotum twice a day. You put it on the ball sack because it's not going to transfer to other people unless you're rubbing your balls on them, which people generally don't like when you do that. Maybe some people do, but but it also has, the skin on the scrotum is very thin, so you have more absorbency into the body. And the reason why we theorize that that leads to the elimination of these side effects with still optimal testosterone levels is that because the testosterone is not having to be metabolized in the liver, they're not having to clear the ester, the cypionate or enanthate, that system seems to be compromised and not working as well in men who are inflamed and overweight and drinking too much alcohol. So if we can put a transcrotal cream in the mix, the testosterone's basically going straight into the bloodstream, but it's also having more exposure to the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, which we know is an antagonist internally to estrogen. So when an individual is sick and inflamed, sometimes we look at it and go, oh, they're making too much estrogen. A big factor is they're not making enough DHT. Because excess body fat, excess alcohol consumption, hypothyroidism, all of these factors, insulin resistance, all down-regulate 5-alpha reductase expression as well. So when we go through the scrotum, we can now get a scenario where we can actually mimic the hormonal balance of a healthier man without needing to use medications that may cause further side effects. The problem with the aromatase inhibitors is that even if you dose them to the point that you get your levels about right, and I've spoken to guys who are advocates of them and they will admit that this is still a drawback, they still kind of make you feel a bit funky. Sometimes they can still cause joint pain, even if you don't tank your levels. They can still cause some brain fog. They can make you feel like a bit of a dum-dum. They can make you feel a bit slow. So I think that a good practitioner should be able to avoid the need for them, but it's very important that guys who are having these side effects, which are estrogenic in nature, still get them resolved.
True. And how often do you run into needing to manipulate SHBG with your clients? Because that seems to be one that, again, is either demonized and it's the devil and everyone has to do something about it, or other people think it's really not that important. So how often is that having a meaningful effect on people, and how do you know that it is?
Yeah, SHBG is something where everyone seems to want it to be higher or lower. It seems like no one's ever happy with their SHBG and they just blame it for all their problems. Outside of extremes, I contest the idea that SHBG is a determining factor for injection frequency, because what determines injection frequency is the half-life and metabolism of the ester, which is impacted by liver enzymes. SHBG impacts how much of the testosterone is bound and free. That impacts how much testosterone dose you need to increase the free level. I think we should all be injecting as often as we sustainably can, which for most people is 3 times a week or twice a week if you're lazy. And SHBG just determines how much total testosterone you need to bring those levels up to optimize the free testosterone. SHBG can be dysregulated by things like prolonged massive caloric deficits or prolonged states of deep ketosis will drive it up. Liver disease will drive it up or down, depending on the case. And hypothyroidism will drive it right down. Insulin resistance will also drive it down as well. So I look at SHBG kind of like your thumbprint. It's as long as you're healthy. Some people, your SHBG is your SHBG. For some guys, it's going to be 20. For some times, it's going to be 40, 60, 70, and you just got to work with it. It does go up with age, but trying to modulate or manipulate SHBG levels is trying to push water in a different direction. It's not going to work. You can take 10 milligrams of boron and you'll knock your SHBG down by 20 points, and then it will come back by 20 points because your body will just hyper-excrete the boron. There's not a healthful way to lower or manipulate SHBG. You just got to work with it.
So if someone is coming back high total but low free, perhaps because of SHBG, as long as they're not having side effects, would that just be a sign to you that they need more to get their free in the correct place? Yeah.
So when someone comes to me with stellar total, SHBG of I had a guy yesterday who had 95 SHBG, which is pretty high. My general kind of joking statement with it is if it's got 1 digit or 3 digits, you've got a problem. But with that said, 80, 90 is pretty high. In those situations, I'll always look to be is there a root cause that has dysregulated this? So for high SHBG, I'm looking at, is this guy crash dieting? Is this guy in a horrible ketogenic diet where he's not, eating sufficient protein regularly to keep out of that deep ketogenic state? And in those scenarios, as long as there's not something that we can actually resolve and fix, it's something that we have to work around, in which case, we have to bring the androgens up to be able to support the free testosterone. If someone naturally, let's say has good total, low free, high SHBG, and then you come in with TRT, people need to be aware that the SHBG will drop. And for some people, let's say this guy's at 95, for some people it'll gradually over 6 months drop to 80, 70, 60. Sometimes it will come right down to 30 or 40. So if you're going to keep your testosterone dose the same, then that could potentially lead the free to go up and up and up and up and cause problems. So some people ask, why do we monitor why do we monitor bloods on TRT when someone's got their blood work dialed in and have had their dose dialed in for months and years? One, because we legally have to. The government makes us do it. But it's also important that we look at that every 6 months, because if your SHBG changes dramatically, which it can in the first year, that is going to impact your free significantly, which may impact your symptoms and your dose.
Sure. Stop doing all the things you shouldn't be doing and start doing all the things you should be doing. If people are looking for where to start, it's that. Testosterone is what creates confidence. It's what gives the capacity for leadership. It's what drives the ability for one to become courageous and competent in their skill set. If you go on TRT and then live a lifestyle that you would never have those levels in the first place, your blood's going to get really